All right. Hello and welcome to Dr. Daniel A. Fran's The Meaning Project podcast and Rabbi Baruch Halevi's The Defiant Spirit podcast. We get together every once in a while to form the dynamic duo of Rabbi B and Dr. D, fighting the existential vacuum and meaninglessness everywhere we can be heard. B, you can tell we're on the same team today, man. We got the same blue V-neck going on, but I did put on my therapist cardigan just for those watching on YouTube so they can tell the difference between us. B, how you been, man? It's been a while since we had an opportunity to chat. What have you been up to?
Well, as I'm looking at myself in this picture, I'm realizing I probably didn't use enough sunscreen, so I get pretty dark pretty quick. But yeah, I've been out in the woods. My wife and kids are in Los Angeles, and I had the week to go out in my RV and reconnect with nature, sit out there, me, my dog, my RV, and my Viktor Frankl books. Dream come true.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. As I was saying earlier, the family just took off this morning. I've got some projects I'm working on and wrapping up some other ones. Did some public speaking lately, which is turning in some great opportunities to do some consultation with some local business. And for those that may have heard on, I think it was last week's podcast, had the pleasure of chatting with Alex Vesely, Viktor Frankl's grandson, as well as philanthropist Pam Roy. Both of them are involved in the upcoming, hopefully upcoming, not soon enough, feature film about the life of Dr. Frankl. Pam is a big part of that, working with the production team. She's in script writing and everything else. And I know they're still looking for the lead actor to portray Dr. Frankl. B, I haven't got a call yet for that. I mean, have you? Has anybody pinged you for that?
Nobody has, because I'm booked up in my other feature films. I've been doing my own recording, my films, and so
yeah. Hey, let's talk a little bit about that, man. How's the Enneagram project going?
No, but seriously, isn't that the one that Tony Robbins acquired the rights to?
Correct.
Yeah,
he's a big part of the production.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Actually, this team, Straight Up Films, I had an opportunity to chat with them a while back. They've done some really cool mental health videos focused on teenagers. And one I chatted with them about was on the overprescription of medication for struggling teens. Wow. And great group of women doing this work, and working with Tony Robbins and Pam Roy and Alex. And yeah, it's exciting, right? Like here you and I are in our little podcast with our wonderful audience. And I feel like we're on the cusp of the world really kind of coming back to meaning, seeing Dr. Frankl's work and hopefully being introduced to a new audience.
I think it's going to help mainstream a message that hasn't been mainstreamed and has been on the periphery, and it's time. Time has come. So, at least we can say we were a little bit ahead of the curve trying to bring this message out there. And now you got your serious sign behind you, the Meaning Project podcast.
Yeah, check it out, man. Got the Meaning Project podcast sign. Yeah, not fooling around.
Good.
We are podcast famous, and with all of our listeners supporting us, thank you, thank them. So
it's good to be back in action with you. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of recording of a program called Defy Your Number, which is a synthesis of my passions of both Dr. Frankl and of the Enneagram. And I believe it's the first of its kind, because I don't think there are that many people who are interested in both simultaneously. I open up it's a video, do-it-yourself kind of intro to the Enneagram. And the first part of it is all about the defiant power of the human spirit and the work of Dr. Frankl, and how he would not approve of another Enneagram typing system. I think he very much would have resisted any personality profiling, because as you know, he was all about that we are not our body, we are not our personality, we are the defiant power of our spirit. And so I created this program to defy the Enneagram number assessment tool, to realize that it's the starting point. It's how we end up, as he would say, reacting when we are in fear, but it's not how we are here to live or be. We are here to respond as the spirit. And so the Enneagram is a great tool if you understand it from the Frankl perspective of you are nous, you are spirit, and anything that reduces you to less than that well, you're here to defy it. And so that's really his message, although he never addressed the Enneagram, through the lens of the Enneagram. So that's my program I've been working on, and just launched it, and pretty excited about it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the bit of the sneak peek you gave me. I can't wait for more people. I know when my audience, if you will, heard about the work you were doing, I got a lot of positive feedback. Some excited people out there, and as we shared back on the Enneagram MBTI episode, like it's becoming, it's definitely gaining some traction. People are paying attention to the Enneagram. And think about it, if we're gaining some, if meaning's becoming more popular to talk about and people are addressing it, and the Enneagram, here you are on the cusp of really sharing some really powerful things with the world. So it's really cool.
Well, it's, it's the nature of our work with this podcast. I want tools, how to apply the beautiful work of Dr. Frankl's message to my life in practical, applicable ways. And so that's what I'm doing on my side. You're doing it on yours. And I love that we come together, and I've missed this over the past few weeks, of really fleshing out some of these ideas to make them real. And you really have been thoughtful in bringing to us today's topic. So let's dig in.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you allowing me to bring this one up. This has been, so for those that know me or my work, I use a lot of the couples theories from the Gottman Institute. Love the Gottman Institute and their work. Real quick, brief on them. This is, I tell most of my clients that I recommend this book to. First of all, I don't only recommend the book to clients. It's a book, we have multiple copies here in our house. I keep multiple copies in my office to share with people because it's a book I have to go back to every once in a while too. I give this out to everybody I know getting married or in a serious relationship, because it's just so full of helpful, important information to keep a relationship healthy and thriving. And so the Gottman Institute, love their work because it's not just theory or idea. They did some solid research. They took couples, put them in what they called their love lab, and videotaped them having interactions, discussion, and argument. And through that research, they broke these videos down into microseconds, just small little interactions where they were able to predict with a fair degree of certainty what relationships would continue and which ones ended in separation or divorce. And then they distilled this information down to share with the rest of us. So outstanding book, 7 Principles of What Makes Marriage Work, is kind of the foundation. But today we are talking about what makes love last, how to build trust and avoid betrayal, because lately in my office, I've been dealing too much with betrayal. And I feel as though, and when we say betrayal, of course, the big betrayal, a sexual infidelity, intimacy with another person outside the marriage or relationship, that's a big one. It's a hard one to come back from. It is possible to come back from. But I wanted to talk about Gottman's list of 10 other ways to betray your lover, because these are so easily avoidable. Just paying attention to these and staying away from them, or if they are in your relationship, dealing with them in a healthy way will prevent you from betraying your partner and having to engage in some extensive therapy.
Yeah, I think the work of Dr. Gottman was really made famous to the mainstream through another book, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. I believe that's where I read about him first years ago, where he talks about Gottman's work as the ability to get to an intuitive level, right? In really feeling relationships and seeing the ones that are going to succeed and the ones that aren't. His work is really, I think, reminded me of some of the work I'm doing in the Enneagram, which is there are different centers of intelligence. There's the brain, there's the heart, but there's also this gut, this intuitive, and really bringing all 3 of those into the conversation around relationships. And I know some of these 10 topics touch upon that. I will say one other thing, and on a lighter note, I think I'm going to get more invites to weddings than you are, because if you're giving away this book, see, I give away Rabbi Shmuley Boteach's book, Kosher Sex. Oh, that's way more fun, right?
Really, coach. See, now I have a gift pack to give to people. I am certainly getting Kosher Sex to pass on.
It's a great book. We'll talk about it maybe the next time, as like for those who aren't dealing with, this topic and want to get into the more proactive side of staying in a healthy relationship, Kosher Sex is a great book. So if you want me to come to your wedding, and you want that book, invite me. And if you want,
well, and it's funny, B, I know somebody running right now, listening to this podcast, that heard Kosher Sex and said, Sign me up for that. So that's awesome.
As an aside, Rabbi Bateyah's second book was Kosher Adultery. So that's a whole other conversation.
Well,
But
how fitting. Let's get into the
talk
10
about
other
it.
ways to betray your lover, right? And as we talked before, in the pre-production meeting, no, we cannot use, I don't know if it was just Paul Simon or Simon and his partner, Art Garfunkel, that sang 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. But just the fact that I've mentioned that song, we're probably going to get sued prolifically. But 10 other ways to betray your lover. Number one is conditional commitment. And this is a difficult one because we live in a time where many people choose to live together before marriage or for years in the absence of marriage. And so this idea of conditional commitment is, I am here with you until what? Until something else comes along, until I get frustrated, until I just don't want to be here. And my experience in the clinician's office is, in the absence of those vows and wedding rings, the idea of commitment is very vague and easy to walk away from, or easier. Don't get me wrong, divorce is prolific in our time, but that is certainly a betrayal. Can
we I'm gonna challenge the idea. I don't know if it's challenging you because it's not your 10 ways to leave your lover, not betray your lover. I haven't read this book, so I'm just kind of going off the idea and your insights into it. But all marriages are conditional. So I guess I'm really trying to flesh out, what does that mean? Because when I do weddings, in the Jewish tradition, at least, you sign a ketubah, which is a marital contract. And, essentially, whether or not you sign one of these, you are agreeing to, I choose you to the exclusion of every other person out there. That's what a marriage is. You're separating out. The word holiness in Kabbalah is separation. So the moment you choose somebody, you're separating them out. And there are conditions around that separation. And that separation means I choose you and I won't be choosing anybody else during our time together. Right. Called infidelity. So how is this different? Because conditional commitment is what a marriage is.
Well, and I think that's, a conditional relationship. All relationships have conditions, right? Give and take and everything. But it's that idea of commitment, right? My commitment to you. Well, you just said it there at the end. That marriage contract. Yes, there are conditions in it, and we shall stay married as long as we are both meeting these conditions. But that idea of commitment, that it's conditional, that I can walk away at any time, right? Just at my desire.
Right. So it's about, because there are conditions around this commitment, but is going into it all in the words of Brene Brown.
There we go. Right.
So there are no conditions on my being all in. I'm 100% in, understanding there are conditions around that being all in.
Right. Correct. Yeah. And I think when you don't know if your partner is all in, whether it's through marriage or any other kind of, commitment, that's a source of stress and anxiety. And if that person eventually leaves, I mean, obviously that could be a betrayal.
I call this, in my work, I've termed it the 99% rule. And because people don't realize what happens, it's unconscious. I've seen it, that I'm in for 99%. Like, I'm almost all in. And then you feel it. And out of a place of fear, you intuit that and you give 98%. I've said 96%. And then there's this downward spiral. And that's, I think, what, correct me if I'm wrong, he's really touching on, is you have to be 100% all in.
Right. Absolutely. Because you know what? Every relationship has difficulties, not, even less than infidelity. And if you're only, 94% in, and that argument is a 95%er, you're out.
Yep. Okay. So I'm all in, and there are conditions.
There we go.
Got it.
Number two, pretty obvious one. Well, maybe not so obvious. This has been the topic of discussion, debate, argument, even in my office. A non-sexual affair. Well, Dr. Dan, if I didn't have sex with that other person, it's not an affair, but it is.
Thanks, Bill Clinton.
I did not. Never mind. Right. Like, and I think in our times of smartphones and internet, too easy, right? To pour your emotions into another person, rather than your partner, that all of a sudden this other begins to know you more than your partner. And we call it an emotional affair or an internet affair. but it is still an emotional departure from the relationship.
It's such a hard one to really pin down as to at what point do you cross that line, right? As opposed to, physical infidelity, which is, I think, relatively clear. At least I did until the Bill Clinton fiasco. And so, like, where do you cross into the non-sexual affair? How do you define that?
Well, and I think that's part of the relational contract, right? That's for the couple to decide. I don't think as clinicians we get to make hard and fast rules when it comes to relationships, because there are some relationships that can survive multiple partners. We call them, I believe the common term is swingers. Those don't always end well. But when it comes to that idea of what is over the line, it really depends on the nature of the relationship and the two individuals. I would say when you're investing more time and energy and emotion in another person than your partner, that's probably out of bounds.
I think it's like a lot like former Chief Justice Potter said about pornography. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it.
There you go.
I think that it's a slippery slope, but you know it when you are in that, and you feel like you're sharing, you're divulging something about your marriage that is really for the confines of your marriage.
Right. I think the most common one I come across is when you're talking to somebody at work of the opposite gender, the opposite sex, more than you're talking to your partner about your partner. That's a problem. That's a betrayal.
Yeah. And you're right. It's a sliding scale for everybody. It depends on culture. In the Orthodox Jewish world, you're not allowed to be in a room with the door shut with the opposite sex if they're not your spouse. So in that world, it's a much more stringent line. In our world, right? It's much grayer, but you have to, I think, make that a part of the conversation with your spouse. And I guess for me, that's what we're getting into. It really is about premarital conversations, not just leaving it up to we're in love, we'll figure it out. But like, where are our different expectations around something as gray as non-sexual affair?
Right. And not just premarital, but ongoing throughout marital. That's why I suggest the book I do to check back every 6 months. But it sounds like, many people struggle to talk about sex in a relationship, and a book like Kosher Sex might be an interesting one just to open that conversation up.
I think our viewership will double.
It could be. We'll have to keep an eye on the stats. Lying's a pretty obvious one. Lying is a betrayal, but even those little white lies that we use to avoid tension, right? Like not working through issues, as the good Dr. Peterson says, when we allow things to hide in the fog and not address them, they build up, and that can become a source of betrayal, just not dealing with the issues.
All right, so I get to be, more of the other side, the devil's advocate, and challenge this.
Come on, bring it on.
So in the Talmud, it says that there are times where it's actually a greater mercy to lie than to tell the truth. And I do find that there is some truth. Look, we lie all the time. Well, you may not call it a lie, but I have 80,000 thoughts a day, and I'm not dumping them on you. So I'm withholding. And my part of my work, whether it's a marriage or any relationship, is to discern what gets through the gates of my mouth. And so there is this kind of necessary withholding and carrying some of the burden. Had a particular financial fiasco going on in the background of my life. It's fine. It's good. It's whatever. I decided to withhold that from my spouse until there was some concrete evidence that it was necessary for her to suffer like I was suffering. So, that is a fine line.
Again, I like your phrase, sliding scale, right? Because you're right. My wife doesn't need to know every intricacy that goes on in my work day or in my life, unless there's a potential that it causes an issue in our lives together, right? And I think that's the key to this. Not divulging every factor of our life to our partner is a mercy to them. But when there's the potential for it to be an issue, and I, again, referencing Dr. Peterson in his last book, he tells the story of one of his rules: don't allow things to hide in the fog. of his father-in-law, who for 20 years came home for lunch and ate on the same small plates, and finally after 20 years just let it pile up and pile up and pile up, and he exploded. Why do we have to eat off these damn small plates?
So important. So good. So in Enneagram world, that's the Enneagram 9, where they don't peacemaker, and they tend to steer towards peace, even though they're feeling conflict, and they are known as the most peaceful ones until they're not.
Right. And I think it's recognizing when it's, we should allow things to pass us by. If it's an issue, if it's the way our partner is interacting with us, can we let that go and honestly let that go? Or are we harboring it, or as we say sometimes, scorekeeping and waiting for the next time to bring it up? If that's the case, you're lying to yourself and your partner. If it truly is an issue, address it and move on. And if it's not going to become an issue, let it go and move on. Slide
That's right. And I think that is not just about your partner and having the agreement with there, but is knowing yourself. And where's this coming? Is this a criticism? I think it was Gottman who said there's like a 5-to-1 ratio of criticism to praise or something.
Right.
And really standing guard against it seeping out as criticism, and really discerning, is this, one of those issues that I need to make my stand and communicate?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good one.
The next one, forming a coalition against the partner. I see this very often in young couples, especially, sorry guys, for us young men that have not quite individuated from our mothers yet. Sometimes early on in marriage or a partnership, we may still confide too much in mom, which then forms a coalition against our wives. And that can be, or sometimes even, wives partner with their mothers too much, and we have the male version of the angry mother-in-law. And that's just one way we form coalitions against our partner.
This is ancient. This is the first thing it is said in the Bible of when God says to Adam, a man shall leave his mother and father and cling to his wife and become one flesh. Right there, he was touching on some really deep Freudian problems of the human psyche and our development and the struggle of individuation. But it's unequivocally absolutely true. When you stand under the chuppah, the wedding canopy, or when you're, in a marriage, entering into it, what you're saying is, I choose you to the exclusion of all others, including and particularly my mother, my parents. And it's so easy to say, it's hard for people to do.
Why do you think that is, B? I mean, if we approach that from like a logotherapeutic point of view, it's everywhere. We see it, like you said, thank you for the reminder, right there in the first few lines of the Bible. In most traditions in some way or another. Why do you think it's such a problem?
I think that in the language of Dr. Frankl, I see counseling. I have a hard time counseling men prior to midlife, or if they're younger than midlife, they have to have lost a parent, in particular a father, because until then their eyes aren't open. They're not accepting that this is not a dress rehearsal. This is real. And, life is scary. Life is, we're on a rock on outer space, flying around a hot ball of fire called the sun, and we're going to die. Like, that's scary stuff. And I don't think we allow it in. I don't think we want to face it. I don't think we want to grow up. And I think we hide behind our parents to some degree. And what I see happening when I counsel men that have lost a parent is the veil is down and they can see, and they're more serious than a lot of their contemporaries who are still escaping in artificial, meaningless ways. And so I think that there's this natural tendency, especially for men, because I don't think we go through childbirth. I don't think we feel our emotions oftentimes like women do, to hide behind our parents, especially our mother, and not wanting to man up, as we say. So I think that there's a lot of deep-seated fears about facing some of life's harsh realities, especially for men up to a certain age.
Yeah, and I would say, dang, B, if you're getting men to come to your office at any age individually, good job, you're doing something right. Because too often, I think we hide behind this emotionlessness, this stoicism that, well, I don't need help. And for me, many of the men that come to my office are either dragged there by their partner or wife, or are forced there by a partner or the law or something like that. It is a rare occasion where a man will say, hey, I want some mentorship, some guidance. And for those of you men out there that are doing that, congratulations, good job. Keep at it. That's great courage. And for those of you men who aren't, maybe it's time to start considering that.
So total pop culture reference here, but I do think that this is Will Smith's moment this past week. Everybody here around the world heard the slap around the world. And, I think he told himself this is courageous to go up there and to hit Chris Rock. It's not courageous. It was, what they call toxic masculinity. It's this false bravado of courage. Like it's not chivalrous. What would have been courageous is to hold the pain and the suffering of that, not to laugh because he was laughing. And then he turns and realizes his wife is not happy. So, and then get up there afterwards and give in your talk a courageous, vulnerable talk, because he was called up right afterwards to give his Academy Award speech, and say how it hurt to hear those words and how it felt to laugh and look over at your wife and see that she was hurt. Like that would have been a courageous stand. Yeah. But instead it was this more bravado, right? And people felt it.
I agree. I think we all saw something flawed in that, in the first laughter and then the overreaction, maybe when he realized I may have gotten myself in trouble, or I may have hurt my wife's feeling by laughing at that. But I fully agree with you. It is the pen is mightier than the sword. Conversation is far mightier than lashing out if you want to have a lasting effect.
But back to this point, though, because I think it's about vulnerability. And I think it's easier sometimes to hide, to triangle somebody out. Oh, my mother says this. Oh, somebody says, and you're allowing something to get into the way of your relationship, and you're putting up a wall. And really, to me, a true marriage is about learning how to bring down the walls and be vulnerable. Courage, core, Latin, heart, to expose your heart. And that's just you and your partner.
Yeah. And how do we do that, B? We learn to have difficult but healthy communication about these things and not forming coalitions outside of our marriage.
Yep.
All right. So obvious next one, absenteeism or coldness. When you remove yourself in a cold way from the relationship, when you separate yourself, even for you introverts out there, you need to spend time with, well, not even an introvert thing, because even introverts enjoy those depth relationships. But when you remove yourself accidentally or intentionally from the relationship, getting too busy at work for extended periods of time, years, or just being angry, going back to number 3, allowing those issues to pile up to the point of coldness or resentment that you emotionally or maybe even physically pull yourself from the relationship. That's a betrayal.
I'm sure you see this one a lot. I see this one a lot, and it's a harder one to pinpoint, sort of like that non-sexual affair, because, it's different based on every relationship, on every person, what absentee or coldness means. But I do think people can weaponize this. Withholding is another word, right? As a form of punishment. I'm going to withhold my affection. I'm going to withhold the warmth, and I'm going to show up in body. But that's not, that's fulfilling the letter of the law. It's not fulfilling the spirit of the law of what a marriage is.
Right. Well, and that goes right into the next one, withdrawal of sexual interest, right? We talk about absenteeism or coldness is kind of mental and emotional, and then physical withdrawal of interest in your partner, right? That can be seen as a betrayal too. And all of those really are things that we can avoid simply by talking about it. My wife, when it is school time, she'll go to school all day and teach, and then come home and feel like she has to work some more. And she wants to put her feet up. So she retires to the bedroom and knocks out some work. And there are times where I have to recognize in myself, wow, I feel kind of alone. And so I could become cold and distant myself, or I could go have that difficult conversation and say, hey, maybe we should spend some time together.
I also think both of these are touching upon the work of marriage. The work of life is to offer to give what the other person needs, not what I want to give, right? We've talked about this with the other author, Love Languages. Gardner? No.
Chapman.
Right? Because that's true intimacy, not to give you what Wayne Dyer plays on that, into me see, to see another person and give them what they need. So, it's not my sexual interest. It might very well be, but what does my spouse, what does my partner need? How does she receive that? And starting to anticipate, right? As opposed to, having to ask me for something. And that's how you start to get to the deeper layers and levels of intimacy and showing up and providing them what they need. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to touch on something that I'm not naming.
Allow me, because this goes right back to our Valentine's Day podcast when we talked about the meaning of love, and that idea of to truly love somebody is to see them in all their uniqueness and singularity, and to honor that, and to transcend the selflessly, to give to that person, to recognize their needs, and to work to engage them.
Yeah, and both of these have that, the 4 and 5 that we're talking about have a withdrawing, an absence to them. And I think of that as the loneliest, that's the loneliest experience. In the Bible, it says it's not good for a person to be levado, not alone, but lonely. Like loneliness is the seed of all destruction. And you can be lonely while standing I think it's worse to be lonely in a marriage than it is to be alone outside of a marriage, because you're looking at a person that you committed to, they committed to you, and there's a loneliness in that. That's heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
To stand guard against that and to really fight and give, even when you feel like you want to withhold, but to go above and beyond. That's back to this conditional commitment. 100%, even if they're giving 99%, like fight against that.
Yeah, I think that goes a lot into the work of Johann Hari, great journalist, who just about every one of his books relates back to this idea of connection. His first one, Chasing the Scream, talked about the opposite of addiction is connection. And it was 300 pages really illustrating that point. Like you said, when we feel lonely, when we feel disconnected, especially within a relationship where we should be connected, it is a source of a lot of evil, a lot of betrayal, a lot of relationships gone wrong when we miss that connection. I think the next few are quite similar to that, right? We have disrespect and unfairness, two somewhat related ideas that seem kind of obvious, right? Disrespecting another person is bad enough. When you disrespect your partner, who you committed to connect with and be a part of and share life with, it's damaging.
What does that mean? Disrespect? Will you define it for us? I don't know.
I didn't list the examples on there, but I think just any blatant mocking, disregard for feelings, negativity, in a sustained way, right? Let's face it. We may experience discord in our relationships. We may experience frustration with our partners or spouses, and disrespect may accidentally come out, right? The respectful thing to do is realize that. The responsible thing, able to respond, thing to do is to recognize that disrespect, come back, apologize, and heal the relationship. Disrespect is a sustained lack of regard for the other person's humanity.
So that's good. That's a good definition. And I also am looking at this list that we have printed in front of us. Our audience doesn't necessarily have it, but we haven't touched on love. And I think partially because love is not measurable. It's hard to quantify, but respect is. There are things you can do that are disrespectful. And as we're talking it through, I think what we're talking about is those empirical ways that you can name, taste, touch, feel, that you can check the box. This was respectful. This was disrespectful.
Right. I think culture and society tells us a lot about respect, that it is observable, that, like you said, you don't always know what it is, but you know what it isn't. And I think that's a big one. And the other side of that is when your partner points it out, what you did there, what you said, that really hurt me. That felt disrespectful. Well, that is their perception, and that is to be honored. You don't get to argue with that. Like, no, I didn't do that. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, you may not have meant to, but it happened. And the respectful thing to do would be to come back from that, apologize, and understand your own behavior, right? This is the beauty of relationship, is a reflection of yourself and how you behave and what you do to avoid these betrayals.
So then again, does that relate to the 8th one, which was unfairness? I guess also selfishness too, which is our 9th.
Right. Yeah. Very. Yeah. I mean, similar and related. They can be interrelated or singular. Unfairness. One of the ones I see I wrote there is often in finances, right? Putting your needs above the other. hey, we both, put money into the checking account, but I get to spend $500 whenever I want to. You don't. You only get an allowance of $50, right? This is one of those things some couples, especially starting out, really have to operationalize and say, okay, this is what we have to spend freely, and this is what we have to discuss, just so there is fairness and equity in the relationship.
And I think that when I'm reading this, disrespect has more of an intentionality, and unfairness has a more unintentional, but it's still painful. It still hurts. It's just not necessarily intended.
Correct. Can be. Sometimes it is, and that's almost to a point of evil when you intend to be unfair to somebody you agree to be in a relationship with, to marry. That unfairness, it's from my perspective often very sad to see. Hopefully it's accidental and a conversation can cure it up. And
then the ninth one, then selfishness. All of this is selfish.
That's what I was just going to say. You're absolutely right. I think it just expands upon all of the other ones in putting yourself, it's the opposite of what we try to encourage people to do in logotherapy. It's the opposite of self-transcendence. It is only focusing on the self. And that's a path to self-destruction, relationship destruction, and just that existential vacuum we talk about.
And I guess that relates back to me to the coalition one, and leaving your mother, your father, choosing this person as an act of self-transcendence, right? And one of the loneliest feelings in the world, I've seen counseling people who are in relationships that feel like there's a selfishness, is being in that relationship and not feeling special, right? Feeling like you're not any better or worse than your mother-in-law, than the neighbors, then, and I also see with kids too, this idea that, you're supposed to love all children. Your kids don't want to hear that. They want to hear that they're special. Like, you can destroy a child by saying, I love kids, starving in Africa as much as I love you. I want to help those kids starving in Africa, but you're mine and I'm yours, and I have a special relationship. And I think that really we're kind of coming back to this core thread that's running throughout all of these of, I choose you and you're special.
Absolutely. And when choosing anything outside of choosing you is a betrayal,
including myself, right?
Correct. And there we go. That would be the definition of selfishness, wouldn't it? So finally, the last one, broken promises. And I really, this one was interesting in the book, right? He talks about, or they talk about, the idea of broken promises is when you begin a relationship, especially a married relationship, having basic expectations about religion and finances, those should be adhered to. And I think we all know our beliefs, especially about religion, change throughout our lives. The illustration here is, well, one partner decided to stop participating in a particular religion, and that was a betrayal. I think the part that was a betrayal was not talking about it, not confiding in the partner and saying, hey, I'm not sure where we should go with this. Let's talk about it. I can't think of a more robust conversation than talking about something as deep as, right? You really only get to do that with your intimate partners. You can't talk about your religious values out in the public very often. We've known that for decades. But to have that conversation with your partner, with your spouse, say, hey, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. Let's talk about that. What an opportunity for connection. On the other hand, just to make a decision unilaterally on your own and say, I'm not doing this anymore. I could see how that would be a betrayal.
So I've been watching Game of Thrones. I never watched it. I somehow missed that. Did you ever watch Game of Thrones?
It's funny. We were at a restaurant and it came out. The place is known for just playing shows throughout their entirety. And both my wife and I said, this looks really interesting. It was, I don't know, season 4, episode 2, something like that. Who knows? And we tried to start it. And both of us said, man, there is just too much going on, too much drama.
It's, they're starting to lose me in the sci-fi nature of it. I like, though, that the medieval kind of, they take oaths and vows very seriously in ways that I don't think we do anymore. Not to romanticize, it was a hellish time, but I think there was a seriousness about their word, and you really can appreciate, like, I made an oath and the person died, but I still have an oath. I'm not released from that oath to serve this person. And I just think that we've lost the the significance. Partially, I think it's because we have so much access to words. You know, think about like back in the day when you had to write your words out and you write. Now I find myself just typing and like, this is a lot of words and they're a lot less meaningful. You know, social media, we say things now. We have so much access to communication that I think we're communicating less in some ways. And I think we got to get back to this idea of a vow. Is your word is sacred. It's all we have. If you don't have your word, you have nothing. And when with your partner above all else.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the idea that we read a lot in Peterson, like, and many other volumes and pages, like your word is your reality. You create your reality through what you say. And when you break promises freely, you're creating a reality where there's a lack of integrity. People don't trust you. You may not even be able to trust yourself. And that goes really into the last one that they talk about in Broken Promises, the idea of addiction in a relationship, falling into addiction, not allowing oneself. It's not always a choice, but it does happen. But even though it may not be a person's choice to fall into addiction, it is always their responsibility to do something about it. And failing in that responsibility can seem like a betrayal to one's partner, to one's entire family,
to oneself. I see this in working with people who, you know, that's one of the greatest damages of addiction, because somebody who's in the addiction will promise themselves they won't do it again. And then they break their promise and they break it and they break it. And now they have nothing left because they don't have their own word to bond themselves to their soul, to their deepest sense. One last just idea, abracadabra comes from the Talmud, Aramaic. Avra, I will create, kadabra, as I speak. Speech is creation. That's what it means. So abracadabra is, you know, I'm going to create out of nothing. But it comes from this idea that our speech and our word is creative. And that when we violate that, you know, we have violated the word, our bond between our spouse. It doesn't mean you can't repair it. It just means you got to address it.
And that's a beautiful point. Even in betrayal, a relationship can come back from it, even from the ultimate betrayal of sexual infidelity. Whether it was, I've had to deal with it as a person making one mistake or a series of mistakes over prolonged periods of time. And I've seen relationships heal and come back from that, even be stronger. And I've seen relationships destroyed by it. But either way, addressing the issue, talking about it, rebuilding trust in self and trust in each other, a couple can come back from these. But going back to your point, it has to be discussed with words to create a new reality.
Amen, brother. I think we probably should wrap up because your friend who's jogging probably needs to stop. And I know he can't stop until...
You know what? If you knew him like I did, we'd say, hey, he might need to keep going.
We're doing you a favor by talking.
Now, I do, you know, there has to be, for those of you listening, there has to be a podcast at some point. It's going to be, it may be a double or triple episode. We go through all of B's words that he can break down into what the true meaning is. That, I don't know how many there were there. That was so cool. I love when you do that, because I'm like, oh, what's coming out of that? I'm going to learn something here. So I hope our audience, running or not, is certainly learning something from the history of linguistics here.
I don't know if you'll learn anything, but you might, you know, do better on one of those Trivial Pursuit games. So,
right. I'm going to go turn Jeopardy on as soon as we get done, see if I can win. Okay.
And for those who stuck around, do you prefer the bald guy who's a little more pale or the bald guy who's a little more tan? So that way we'll know you're
I got to tell you, B, I think it's real. That is a great and yet unfair question. There will be a time here soon when we see the sun in Farmville. It's you know, it's are we talking mid-spring, early spring here? We should be seeing the sun. And brother, I woke up and I looked outside and the grass was white. That's not right, man. Not right. So golf courses are supposed to be opening up here and there's snow on the ground. It's nonsense.
Come to Colorado, brother. It's sunny almost every day.
You're tempting me, man. I will be there soon.
Sounds good. Well, I really appreciate getting back together and, you know, getting the band back together and doing our thing. So.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, man.
All right. Take care, buddy.